I hope people will take a look at the maps of what happens when 150 to 300 megaton warheads land, or kiloton warheads land on American cities. The spread of the radiation, how long the contamination will be. Guys, it's over. It's game, set, match. Humanity is gone. The Russians aren't playing around. They understand the seriousness of this. And they are not going to sit back and allow the United States to play stupid games that put the existential survival of Russia at risk. If you think Russia's going to let the United States put a standoff strike weapon, American-made, on an American F-16 and pilot it with a Ukrainian and have these weapons be launched against Moscow and St. Petersburg, you're insane. Russia will know exactly where that attack came from the United States, and the United States will pay the price. This is why I say we are on the edge of the abyss.
In the past 24 hours, Ukraine has faced yet another wave of significant losses on the battlefield. Inspector Scott Ritter has previously warned of the long-term consequences Ukraine would face if it continued its offensive operations without recalibrating its strategies. The numbers we will examine today underscore the gravity of this situation. Starting with Kursk, Ukrainian forces have lost 17 heavily armored vehicles, including one of their crucial tanks, as well as 3 artillery pieces. The destruction of an air defense system in this region is especially detrimental, given that it leaves Ukrainian forces more vulnerable to Russian air superiority. These losses are further compounded by the destruction of 7 additional vehicles, totaling 25 armored losses in this sector alone. Beyond material losses, the human toll is just as devastating. Roughly 400 Ukrainian soldiers were killed in action, slightly fewer than the overwhelming losses reported earlier this week. However, these casualties reflect a pattern of continued strain on Ukraine's already overburdened forces. These losses are mounting daily, and as Scott Ritter predicted, they're stretching Ukrainian resources to their limits. But Kursk is only the beginning of a broader story, one that spans multiple fronts, where the scale of destruction is reshaping Ukraine's capacity to defend its territory. As Inspector Scott Ritter has pointed out in past analyses, the conflict is shifting into a prolonged war of attrition. This is no longer about rapid advances or sweeping victories, it's about grinding down the enemy one loss at a time. Nowhere is this clearer than in Kharkiv and Kupiansk, 2 critical areas where Ukrainian forces are struggling to maintain a foothold. In Kharkiv, the situation remains somewhat stable, with 125 casualties reported within the expected range for daily skirmishes. But make no mistake, even these normal numbers are part of the broader toll that Ukraine is suffering across its front lines. Every life lost here chips away at their ability to sustain long-term defense. Kupiansk, on the other hand, has become a flashpoint. Here we see a significant surge in casualties, with 460 Ukrainian troops killed. This is not a random spike. Kupiansk holds immense strategic importance as a logistical hub for Ukraine. Losing this area would jeopardize their supply chains and could drastically affect their ability to defend key positions across the Eastern Front. The numbers we're seeing here are an indicator of just how high the stakes have become for Ukraine. Scott Ritter has often emphasized the importance of logistics in modern warfare. The losses in Kupiansk aren't just about soldiers, they represent the weakening of critical infrastructure. The ability to maintain supply lines and reinforce troops is being undermined, which could have a cascading effect across other fronts. The situation in Kupiansk is a warning sign for Ukraine, but as we move further east to Donetsk, the scale of the conflict grows even more intense, with casualties mounting on an unprecedented scale. The battle for Donetsk continues to be one of the bloodiest and most strategically critical fronts in this war. Inspector Scott Ritter has frequently stated that the fighting here could be a bellwether for the wider conflict. What happens in Donetsk will likely determine the outcome of battles in other regions. Bakhmut, a key area of focus, has once again seen catastrophic losses for Ukrainian forces. Nearly 780 soldiers have been killed in the last 24 hours alone, a number that approaches the grim threshold of 800 casualties. Bakhmut has been a focal point for months, and the intensity of fighting here has not diminished. Ukrainian forces are being forced to dig in deeper, but the constant pressure from Russian advances is exacting a heavy toll. Ritter has previously noted that the continuous drain on personnel and resources in Bakhmut could lead to a collapse of Ukrainian defenses if these trends continue. Avdiivka, while slightly less bloody, remains another critical point of engagement. Ukrainian forces here reported 455 deaths, a decrease of 100 compared to the previous days. Yet, Even this lower number reflects the extreme cost of maintaining control over this region. Avdiivka is crucial because it serves as a stronghold for Ukrainian forces attempting to hold back Russian advances. Losing this position would not only open the door to further Russian gains, but also risk compromising the entire Donetsk front. As these losses pile up, the question becomes whether Ukraine can continue to hold these key areas, particularly when their armored capabilities are being decimated across the battlefield. Across all front lines, Ukraine has suffered staggering losses, which have far-reaching implications for their ability to continue this fight. Inspector Scott Ritter has repeatedly stressed that Ukraine's reliance on Western-supplied weapons, such as HIMARS, could become a critical vulnerability if those systems are neutralized, and today we've seen that happen. In the past 24 hours alone, Ukraine has lost 2,425 personnel, a number that remains devastating, even though it falls slightly short of the 2,500 peak seen last week. However, these losses are not just about manpower, they represent a significant degradation of Ukraine's military capabilities. Among the equipment losses are 3 tanks and 20 artillery systems, including a self-propelled artillery unit. These are vital for maintaining firepower along the front lines, and their loss is a blow to Ukraine's ability to sustain its defense. Perhaps most significant is the destruction of 2 rocket artillery systems, including 1 HIMARS launcher. The HIMARS system has been a cornerstone of Ukraine's strategy to disrupt Russian supply lines, and its loss will limit their ability to carry out precision strikes. As Scott Ritter pointed out, the reliance on these Western systems has created a critical dependency, and their loss could have a domino effect on Ukraine's overall operational capacity. As these losses mount, attention turns to Ukraine's supply lines, which are becoming increasingly fragile, especially with the continued Russian strikes targeting their logistics infrastructure. Inspector Scott Ritter has long emphasized the critical role of supply lines in sustaining a military campaign, and today Ukraine's vulnerabilities in this area have been starkly exposed. Over the past day, Russian forces have targeted and destroyed multiple ammunition depots across key regions, severely disrupting Ukraine's ability to resupply its forces. One of the most significant strikes was on a missile and artillery storage site, a blow that will limit Ukraine's ability to launch effective counterattacks in the coming days. In total, 10 ammunition depots were destroyed, including in Kupiansk, Donetsk, and Kherson. The loss of these depots means that Ukrainian forces on the front lines will face delays in receiving crucial supplies, further weakening their defensive capabilities. Perhaps more concerning is the destruction of a Ukrainian drone assembly facility. This factory was a key component of Ukraine's ability to produce unmanned aerial vehicles UAVs for both reconnaissance and targeted strikes. Without this facility, Ukraine's drone capabilities will be severely hampered, affecting their ability to gather intelligence and execute precision strikes against Russian positions. With their supply lines under relentless pressure, Ukrainian forces are finding it increasingly difficult to sustain their defensive operations, leading to vulnerabilities that Russia is quick to exploit. In Kursk, Ukrainian forces have been attempting to push westward toward Glushkovo in a bid to stabilize their left flank. Inspector Scott Ritter has repeatedly highlighted the difficulties Ukraine would face in this region due to the entrenched Russian defenses. Despite the Ukrainian forces' numerical superiority with a reported 3-to-1 advantage, they have made little progress. The area around Glushkovo has become a focal point of intense fighting, but Russian forces have managed to hold their positions, repelling Ukrainian offensives time and again. Ukrainian commanders are undoubtedly frustrated by their inability to break through, especially given the heavy resources they've allocated to this operation. The losses of several armored vehicles and artillery units, including a HIMARS system, have further hampered their efforts. As Ritter predicted, the entrenched Russian defenses, despite being numerically outmatched, have proven highly resilient. The willingness of Russian troops to hold these positions at all costs has allowed them to maintain control over key areas, frustrating Ukrainian plans. As Ukrainian forces regroup in Kursk, we turn our attention to the southern fronts, where the tactical situation remains fluid but equally challenging for Ukraine. In the southern regions of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, Ukrainian forces continue to face stiff resistance. Inspector Scott Ritter has previously noted that the southern front lines could become a decisive factor in the outcome of the war, and the situation here remains critical for both sides. Ukrainian losses in these regions have been slightly lower compared to other fronts, with 125 casualties in Ugledar and 80 in Zaporizhzhia, Kherson. However, this doesn't mean the fighting is any less intense. Russian forces have been successful in retaking several key villages, including Raskaya and Cherkasskaya, further solidifying their control over these regions. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces have attempted to recapture territory, notably the village of Borky. This move is part of a larger strategy to disrupt Russian supply lines heading towards Belgorod, a key logistical hub for Russian reinforcements. The battle for control in this area remains fluid, but Ukraine's ability to maintain its supply lines is being tested. As the battle for these southern regions unfolds, the broader strategic picture becomes increasingly complex, and both sides are preparing for the next phase of this grueling conflict. As Inspector Scott Ritter has repeatedly emphasized, the war in Ukraine has reached a critical juncture. The losses on both sides are staggering, but the strain on Ukrainian forces is becoming increasingly evident. With 2,425 casualties reported today, along with significant material losses, Ukraine's ability to maintain its defenses is under severe pressure. Meanwhile, Russian forces continue to make gains, particularly in areas like Kursk and Donetsk, where their resilience has allowed them to hold strategic positions despite heavy fighting. As this conflict grinds on, the question remains, how long can Ukraine continue to sustain such high losses before their defensive capabilities begin to erode? The coming days and weeks will be crucial in determining the next phase of this war, and we will be here to bring you the latest updates as the situation unfolds.